Today's program is happening in conjunction with the National Art Educators Association Annual Conference, which has been happening for the past 3 days at the Convention Center in Minneapolis. So I want to extend a special welcome to those of you who are here from perhaps far away attending the conference. I hope you've enjoyed your time and that we have been good hosts to you here at the Walker. Today's presentation is also a collaboration with Art21, and Art21 is a not-for-profit organization that illuminates the creative process of contemporary artists through documentary films, interpretive media, education programs, and other live events such as this one. Some of you, you may be familiar with Art21 through their television series of short documentaries on contemporary artists that screen on PBS. And they do a lot of other programs as well. It's been really great to work with them. If you're not familiar with their web content, there is a postcard that I believe you got in your program notes. Please take a look at their website. Their team of curators, programmers, and educators put a huge amount of work into assembling vast resources for each artist that they work with that become really important for teachers and students of art and really anyone with a bit of curiosity. So check out that website when you get a chance if you haven't. Art21 is headed into its 5th season, and you got a taste of that on the trailer that was just screening as you were waiting. Those episodes will air this fall, so check out your local PBS listings for those dates and times. The staff at Art21 were instrumental in making the program happen today. I would like to extend a big thank you to Mark Mayer, who coordinated 1,000 details in order to get Mark Bradford here to Minneapolis. And so a big thank you to Mark, who made it very easy for me. I also want to thank Aaron and Carol Mack for their support of the Mack Lecture Series and of education programs in general at the Walker. Before I introduce our speaker, I'm going to give you just a brief rundown of the order of things today. We're actually going to start off by viewing the Art21 segment that features Mark Bradford, which is about 15 minutes. And then Mark is going to come up and take the stage and talk and show a few slides, and then he'll be joined in conversation with Walker curator Dorian Chong that will eventually open up to a Q&A with all of you. And just as a note on that, we are webcasting today, and so if you have a question during the Q&A, please use one of the microphones that the ushers will have on either aisle on the side to ask your questions so that it's recorded on the video. I'm honored to introduce our today's speaker. Mark Bradford is an artist who makes magic out of the stuff of life that the rest of us tend to ignore. Expired street advertisements, materials used for hair treatments at the beauty parlor, even building materials scattered and damaged by Hurricane Katrina. These materials make their way into large canvases on which the artist works meticulously, pasting, cutting, erasing, and sanding layer by layer in a feat of spectacle and dedicated craftsmanship. The city of Los Angeles, where Bradford was born and raised, figures prominently in his work. It lends its detritus to the work's physicality, and its sprawling systems of culture, communication, and exchange inspire the work conceptually. Some of you may remember his piece in the recent Walker exhibition, Brave New Worlds, curated by Dorian Chong and Jasmine Raymond, titled Right and Dirty from 2006. This billboard-sized work is made up of 78 advertisements created by small business merchants in the LA area that the artist collected, manipulated, and arranged into a layered composition. In the Walker installation, it spanned a large wall, effectively inserting the street economies of Los Angeles into a museum in Minneapolis. Mark's practice that includes painting, collage, and video has recently expanded to include large-scale sculptural installations, such as a work on the rooftop of the Carnegie Museum of Art for the Carnegie International in Pittsburgh that took its cue from the stranded victims of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. The piece spelled out the words "help us" and was visible only from above. And in a work completed for the new biennial Prospect.1 in New Orleans, which just closed in January, he constructed a 70-foot arc made out of materials scavenged from the city. In this work and in many others, a mature narrative of race and politics emerges from behind a formalist abstraction, confronting the viewer with familiar stories of contemporary life that are made very real and tangible through a sense of aesthetics both dirty and beautiful. So sit back and enjoy Art 21's introduction to Mark Bradford, and then welcome him to the stage. Thank you.
I put the slide in because I'm always interested in these kind of little vignettes that happen in the city, little things that just I find interesting, little narratives, taking equations and putting them together. And a lot of it has to do with merchant culture or the ways in which merchants display things. And so cleanliness is next to godliness. I thought that's kind of, I just like this photo. So it's just some of the things that I like. I always have my camera and I'm always carrying it with me and just sort of taking these little snapshots. I don't know what they turn into or necessarily if they turn into anything, but it's a way of mapping my own desires, something like the sort of Dada movement of sort of mapping the city based on desire and just sort of starting out from one point and moving it to another. So the city has always been sort of this public and private space for me. People think that public space can't conceal, but I find that public space has as many private secrets as people walking down the street. So that's something that's always been interesting to me. And I wanted to sort of really mine that territory when I started thinking about materials. I really became kind of really interested in looking sort of almost objectively about the materials that I use and becoming very critical of them. When you're in school, they simply just tell you to go off to the art store. You just go off to the art store, you get art materials, and you make work. But I found that first gesture should be questioned. It should be questioned. I don't think that we should all go off to the art store to buy art materials. And so I wanted to really think about that. So I wanted to use paper because paper is it has such a fragile nature, but it has such a historical nature to it as well. And it's quasi-archival. It's something that exists between sort of paint and sculpture, and its drawing exists between that. Works on paper are considered less sort of historically sound than a painting, canvas, and so I was really wanting to sort of that in-betweenness of just material. So in Los Angeles, I mainly go around to sites or go to locations that buildings are going, and I usually take the paper. And it's funny, it's easiest to do it like in the middle of the day. Just sort of like go in, I put the cones down, I have me and my assistant, we have these little uniforms, we're working, we sort of become part of the vocabulary of a community. The way to get caught is to look like an artist. That's for sure the way to get caught. You have to look like you're a worker. And so this is one wall, and it's kind of a quasi thing because what happens is sometimes I'm usually 15 minutes in back of the people that just put them up. So sometimes you run into each other, and it's sort of like this quasi moment where they're doing something illegal and I'm kind of doing something illegal. So they're sort of like, well, you'll call the police. I'm like, we'll call them. And they're like, well, maybe we shouldn't call the police. So it's this kind of, so I like things that exist in between these sort of areas of legality, and I like parts of the city. For instance, there's parts of the city that couldn't happen. But in regards to Los Angeles, it's far enough away from the arm of power, of the center of power, that these sort of slippage can happen. And when slippage happens, I find that it's really interesting conversations that start to happen. This would be zoned incorrect probably in the more sort of linear parts of the city, or where the real estate was more expensive. They certainly wouldn't allow people to sort of put their used vacuum cleaners in front of a church to sell. And this is actually, again, my fascination, and so I thought I would map it. I do a lot of mapping, and so I thought, well, what would it look like if I actually mapped it? This is at the corner of 54th and Crenshaw. My studio is at 43rd and Crenshaw. And this is such a palimpsest of sort of the things that I'm interested in. I mean, you have, the lot itself is a McDonald's lot which burned down in the 1992 riots. And so much of the signage that I'm talking about, the sort of merchant signage, exploded after the 92 riots, because what happened was there were so many burnt out lots, and they put up cyclone fencing, and then you had the sort of informal economies or informal advertising that sprung up. So it's interesting how a political action sometimes will create all these other actions. And so I just, a hip hop kiddie ride called the Hustler. So what happens is on these sort of vacant lots, a carnival will come during the weekend and take them over. And I just thought I would map the whole thing. You have a McDonald's lot after the riots. You have a Hustler, what is that? It's a kiddie ride, but okay, Hustler kiddie ride. Then you have the palm trees. And what's important about the Spanish-speaking signs is because people, they talk, I live in South Central. Well, South Central is a very fluid community, and it's probably 65% Hispanic, maybe 40% African American. But in the narrative of South Central, it's 100% black, gangster rap, and bullets, you're dodging bullets, which is absolutely not the truth. So it's interesting about signs that are actually completely Spanish, because that lets you know that the immediate environment has shifted. So I'm always interested in these particular things that point to that. The old cars wanted. A huge thing sort of in Los Angeles is there's people legal and illegal. And there's a huge car culture around in Los Angeles. If you drive without papers and your car is taken by the authorities will impound it for 30 days, a mandatory 30-day, and then you can sort of take it out. Well, many people simply just buy another car. So you have this kind of these informal lots. They use this sort of public parking areas where they have just blocks and blocks of cars for sale, and you absolutely know that informality has to do with immigration and policing, and so it really is kind of interesting to me. And a lot of the time when you see old cars wanted or junk, basically it's sometimes they just don't have the tags, and so it's better just to sell it and go buy another one. The Nefertiti-inspired local hair braider, the reason why the signage is so interesting is this particular person has been doing this hand-painted signage for more than 15 years. I've been documenting it for 10 or 15 years. This exact same sign, same phone number in the same neighborhood. And it's really interesting. I called her one day and I said, I've been documenting you for all these years, and that's really interesting, this hand-painted signage and this kind of tradition. And she said, okay, do you want your hair braided? So this idea of kind of, I thought that was just interesting. I said, oh, okay, right. So again, this is Boreas, and so sort of oftentimes the materials come back into my studio and become part of my imagination, and I'm interested in abstraction, but not in the sort of abstract expressionism's desire for an ideal, this sort of emotive or expressive space that points back to God. And I kind of reject the idea of the artist as a hermetic condition. I go between sort of interior spaces and exterior spaces, and they blend together. This is temporary, so I also became interested in mapping very particular parts of Los Angeles, and I would Google map or an address. Google Maps and Google Earth, you can just lose yourself on that. But it's really more about mapping my imagination or laying my imagination over something that has to do with technology and having the technology collapse. It's very difficult to construct a map by the hand, because there's going to be so much failure in it, because I'm not going to use actually the right tools. So it's almost like building a computer by yarn, but having a desire for it to work. This idea of something, I don't know what happened, but there's somehow that we associate the hand with something that's imperfect, and we associate technology with something that can attain perfection or get much more closer to it. So I like the relationship between the hand and the desire to be perfect. And so this is temporary because it's based on utility service alert, codings that you see, and Pink means temporary. So it's a temporary condition that goes on underground. Blue means potable water. White means clear. That's all I can remember right now. So pushing it further along, I was asked to go to New Orleans to be part of Prospect.1. And I love to do sort of site-specific work, and I also love to sort of bleed into economies and communities exist. But because of the recent history in New Orleans, that became really challenging. So this is the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans where I was proposing to build an arc. And every lot that you see actually was a house before Hurricane Katrina. So it is a vast, vast landscape of memory and really recent. And so I thought, well, how am I going to actually engage this in this very particular place at this particular moment with being respectful? And I was interested in this kind of sculptural, social, and I knew that I knew that I wanted to do it. Do you guys see the arc? Thank you. Oh, wait a minute, I can't even see it myself now. Oh yeah. So it's sitting on a funeral parlor lot, Glapion funeral parlor. And down this street is the nonprofit that I began to work with. What happened was that when I went to New Orleans, I just thought, well, I have to get out of the car. What I'll do, I'll just park and I'll get out of the car and I'll just walk and walk and walk and walk and walk. Well, one day I came across a man, you can see it there. I came across a man who decided that he was going to build a nonprofit called L9 in the lower Ninth Ward. And I decided that I was going to partner with him and kind of work on the infrastructure for something that was sustainable and sort of not do a project. But before I kind of came to that, I decided I was going to do the project. I was not going to, every building in New Orleans had to be inspected, and they had to mark the number of dead, and they had to, and the inspectors. And so I decided that I wasn't going to document that. I decided I was going to document just the animals. It was a way into a very catastrophic situation from a side door. It was a political situation, and I knew I wanted to engage it, but I didn't want to do it head on. So One Cat Scene kind of became kind of the sort of how the sort of art came out of it. I thought of one, a singular instead of two. I thought about a biblical story where everything had to be in pairs, and I thought, well, one cat clearly wouldn't have made it. So this idea of being abandoned, this idea of being on your own, this idea of having to sort of negotiate after or being left behind, and the feeling when I was in the lower Ninth Ward is that you really felt that it was sort of left behind. So that became sort of the cornerstone of how I built this sort of project, one part of it, and one cat outside, beagle taken, canine rescued, both canines rescued, shepherd seen. And I also knew that I wanted to use the materials of my vocabulary, and that's just a detail of it. So this is Keith Calhoun, and what you're seeing on the left is the building that we're standing on his house that was destroyed. In the left-hand corner is the building that he bought and wanted to turn into the L9 Cultural Center. So immediately I thought, well, this is a moment where, like, how do you partner? How do you work with something to make it sustainable that has nothing to do with a biennial that simply is there for a certain amount of time and moves on? So I knew that there were a few instances where other people were going to come to New Orleans for symposiums, for another artist, Paul Chan, Waiting for Godot, I did an incredible piece in the lower ninth ward. So I knew that the art world, as we understand it, was going to come. And so I talked with Keith and I said, look, what we need to do is we need to organize an auction. And we need to contact some of these organizations and tell them that we're going to have an auction and I'm going to give you a painting, and some of the people that want to mark Bradford can come and they can bid on it, and we can get the money and we can push with your infrastructure, your dream of what you want to do. So we did that. It was very successful. We raised $100,000 in about 20 minutes because of the fact that it was really interesting, because it's a way of taking a certain type of currency and power from one position and moving it into another, which I found, it's Peter, that I actually found really, really sort of sustaining and exciting as an artist helping another artist. It was really, really interesting. So that's Keith and myself, and that's the opening of it. So we got enough for drywall, infrastructure, and Keith is a photographer. And it's really funny because he had these stacks and stacks of images that had been just ruined after the hurricane, and he was going to throw them out. And I said, don't throw them out. You don't throw those out. Actually, that's your history. So that was part of it. And what happened was that this L9 Cultural Center became like a hub for everyone to start meeting back in the lower ninth ward, and it became very, very active. And I had kind of pushed back from the idea of making the art until they started asking me. They're like, well, this is really great, but when are you going to do the art? When are you going to make your project? And I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess I can still, because I had just decided that this was the project. So it really was a very simple project. I used sort of shipping containers because much of what happened in the lower ninth ward, yes, the water did a lot of damage, but also shipping containers, because there was a dock very near. When the dock broke, all the shipping containers came crashing into the lower ninth ward and did quite a bit of damage. So there were so many shipping containers around. It just had this it was sort of embedded in the memory. And the trailers that they sort of lived in were exactly about the same length as the shipping container. I used both local and people that I brought in to work with. It was 70 feet by 16 feet. The site that I chose was in the back of the lower ninth ward. Holy Cross, where L9 is more upriver a little bit in the lower ninth ward. I chose to go all the way to the back, and I actually wanted to make this sculpture a destination, but a destination that you really had to drive very deep into the interior of the lower ninth to get to. I knew the Prospect.1 would bring a certain amount of visibility, but I wanted to make sure that the site that I chose also would lend itself to people having to experience and to wonder and to question, why has not more been done? These images you're looking at are only 6 months old. There's so little that's been done that just to question. But of course, I'm making this an art project. So the only reason why I was really able to do this out was because the community really got behind it. The community was really sort of helping me and working with me. And then before Prospect.1 opened, I had a crab boil for the whole lower ninth ward. So really what you're seeing now is not the opening of Prospect.1, because I was nervous that this part would not be included enough. So we had our own opening. We had a crab broil. We invited everybody. The whole place turned out. I was cooking all day. Lord, I've never seen so much crab. But it was really just, and it really became very fluid. People came to the site, and it really became more about a communal sustainability project than just this one arc. And the arc was there for 100 days, and then it dismantled. And when they actually wanted, they kept saying, no, keep it here, keep it here. I said, no, this was my art practice. I wasn't making a public sculpture, a permanent public sculpture. I was making 100 days. And so it was, and so that's really the image that I really liked the most, because the name of the ark was Mithra. Mithra it sort of was the god they worshipped the bull, and from the bull's loins, all sort of plants and animals and humanity came. So this idea of rebirth and the seeds of being there already really kind of worked. And it was I think it was a successful project because of that. And I made the things that I did not know transparent. And I think that in the end, I felt good with the project. And that's it. Thank you. Over here? Okay. Well, hello, Dorian.
Hi, Mark. Hello, my name is Dorian Chung, and I'm a visual arts curator here at The Walker. And I'm thrilled to be sitting here with Mark Bradford, whom I have known, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah.
And when Jasmine Raymond and I organized a group exhibition in 2007 titled Brave New Worlds, Mark was included, actually represented by the piece that you saw titled Right and Dirty, which he originally produced for the São Paulo Biennial and was brought here as a sort of kind of premiere, I guess, in the United States. So The Walker also has another piece in our collection, well, actually 2 pieces in our collection, I believe, Practice, the video that you saw, as well as one of the paintings titled Analog. So we have a bit of a relationship with Mark, so I'm especially pleased to have him here today to have this conversation. So I was thinking maybe the first thing I want to hear you talk more about is Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very important. I mean, it's obviously the sort of the foundation, the place you were born and raised, and still lives and works. And I was trying to think about Los Angeles, where I'm sort of from too. I wasn't raised there, but my family are there, and I lived there before I moved out to Minnesota. And perhaps it's because that I know the place, but it's not natural to me because, you know, I didn't really grow up there. But so perhaps that's why I feel this way about Los Angeles. But it is a very strange place, isn't it, when you think about it? It's such a sprawling space. It's in the desert.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the kind of natural environment that can sustain however many people that live there, like 20 million people or something like that. It doesn't have enough water, so the water has to be taken from Northern California, and then of course people in Northern California always groan about that. So in a sense, it is a kind of a ludicrous proposition of modernity. And of course, there are many other aspects that are really interesting that you're exploring in your work, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what Los Angeles is and what that space represents to you, especially in relation to many other urban spaces that you've been to.
You know, it's this huge grid. I mean, no wonder I started working in grids. It really has this very sort of, it was mapped out and planned in this very grid. And the isolation, I think, comes because you have to drive. Mm-hmm. So you're literally spending so much time driving in this sort of isolated bubble of your car, and you're also very much aware of these grids as you're marshaled through them by the whole traffic. So there's almost like 2 grids. There's the stop and go grid of sort of street traffic, and then there's this sort of futuristic grids when you're on the freeways. So there's this sort of 2 types of, one is very sort of jerky, and one is sort of moves much quicker. And I think that also the public transportation is very bad.
Right.
And we don't have a metro, we don't have an underground. It's very based on, they destroyed all of that. And with the car, I think in the 50s, we did have red cars and blue cars and everything. But the automobile industry really wanted it to be a driving city. So it really shifted over. So, I mean, and also much of what I'm talking about in my work has to be, it's funny though, it has to be seen so when you're walking or when you're on a bus. So it really does have these kind of economic parts in it. And then Los Angeles is a funny place. We burn it down every 20 years, it seems like. You know, we burned it down in the 60s and burn it down again in the 90s. So I don't, I think this lends itself to this isolation because the communities can be so separated. I think it does lend itself to a certain amount of xenophobia. And in a way because the communities change the freeways are the dividers. They're almost like walls.
Right.
And people exist within the sort of freeways, west and east and north and south, and what your neighborhoods connect and not connect. I'm sure you have the same thing in Minneapolis, but it's very clear in Los Angeles.
Right.
In Los Angeles.
Well, especially in Los Angeles, so much of the way in which the dynamics of communities are described, especially in the media, is through the trope of race, right?
Sure.
But I recall at some point ago that it's really not about race; it's really about economics.
Oh, absolutely, it's about economics. Right. I mean, I think the race component bleeds through an economic component. We have a border 2 hours away that America has, that the U.S. or that Los Angeles has a strong relationship with, both through labor and through sort of political machines, and now the war on the border, as if it's kind of funny because living in Los Angeles and reading about the war on the border is very different than being in Minneapolis, and you sort of think that all of this sort of you get the feeling that it's all being generated in sort of Mexico with no destination. Well, it has to be going somewhere. I mean, they don't, if they're sort of manufacturing something, it usually has somewhere to go. So this sort of not taking responsibility on this sort of southern side or the northern side of the border, it's really a relationship. The border really is a relationship between both sides. And also, so much of what happens in South Central, most of the new immigrants coming into Los Angeles will move to older neighborhoods. The older neighborhoods tend to be typically African American. Well, they racially do change, and the dynamic changes. And there are some clashes, but then there's also quite a bit of just fluidity.
Right.
Just when certain neighborhoods before, they were Caucasian, and then they were something else and something else. What we never really just want to admit is that everything really is fluid. I mean, it really is.
Right, right. But you're especially interested in that idea through that idea of the notion of informal economy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because earlier you were talking about the grids, and if the grids are the official governmental bureaucratic way of organizing the space and demographics, then what you're interested in are sort of how the grid can be broken down or infiltrated.
Manipulated, used, because generally the grid doesn't change, but the way people move in and out of it, I find absolutely fascinating. I find it just absolutely fascinating. And you see that type of formal and informalness much more when you leave the United States. Like in New Delhi, the train stations. I mean, you see it all over. I see this sort of informal economies, the way public space is used both formally and informally, around currency, around trade, around economics.
Right.
It's always been a very fascinating thing to me. And growing up, it was, my mother had a hair salon. It was just black hair salon. I always say black. The African American thing just sounds so formal. African American, I just say black.
Right.
It just works for me. So the hair salon was black. Next to us was an African man he was from Nigeria. Next to him was a Latino family sold mattresses, and on the corner there was a Chinese family that sold used televisions. So I understood race through trade.
Right.
And that was always kind of interesting to me. It's always interesting.
Good. Let me ask you a question about painting and scale.
Yeah.
And especially in relation to your physical height.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
actually on the one of the interviews that's on the Art21 website, you actually talked about, when you're as tall as you are,
Yeah.
you're almost public.
Oh, God,
because
yes.
people just kind of come up to you.
Oh yeah, yeah. You don't. There's no. When you're 6'8", you don't have any public privacy. You can forget that.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. And because the culture in which we live in, it's not considered rude. It's considered rude to ask a woman how old she is. It's considered rude to ask someone's weight, but it's not considered within our society to ask someone how tall they are. But what people forget is, even though you've asked me how tall, someone asked me how tall I am, it may not be the first time that day I was asked how tall I am. It may be the 14th or something like that. So this idea of public, there's very little public privacy. So when I was 15 years old, I was 5'10", and I grew one summer, and I was 6'8". I mean, like by 16, I was 6'8", and I thought, whoa, but it didn't change the interiority.
Right.
So in regards to scale and painting, there's always been this relationship between scale and heroicness, and sort of patriarchy and privilege, and sort of harking back to the great sort of abstract masters. And I thought, well, I don't really quite believe that. For me, my subjectivity, I just simply see things, my scale is just larger. So I thought that I wanted to actually make works that I felt that I could be engulfed in.
Right.
But for me to be engulfed in something, it's got to be pretty big. So something that's just a little over life size would be just, well, I'm almost 7 feet, so just a little bit outside of my reach is already pushing it to 8, 9.
Right.
And then the idea, I used to work small, and the idea, it was actually Unjiju who told me, no, you should work larger. And I remember I was being very hesitant. I didn't think I could take up space. I thought, no, that's... Because one thing you learn when you're tall, you always learn not to take up space. Try to sit in the back. Don't, if I'm talking and I talk like, I gotta remember my arm goes way all the way to the wall. Be careful when you're turning around, look, because there's probably someone in back of you that's down there. So you turn around and you hit them. So I had all these, you guys never think about this stuff, do you? And it's so funny because I always fly business class, and because I'm 6'8". And it's so funny though, I cannot tell you how many people say, oh yeah, I saw you get on the plane, and of course you have to fly business class, but they don't give me a business class ticket for, coach prices. It's sort of like, it's not like I have to pay much more just because of physically who I am. So all of these physical things I've always been so much aware of, but not wanting to take up space. So this idea of expanding or making the works larger, I'm sure has kind of a sort of a psychological component as well.
Well, like all the historical examples, like the great history paintings from the 18th century and early 19th century France, for example, or some of the mid-20th century abstract paintings can be extremely large as well, right? So, so I was thinking about the scale of your works, but also there is something else that makes it more open and fluid or something. And let me see if I can explain this. That it's not just because that they are large that as a viewer that you feel like you can enter and be engulfed by, as you said, and have more materially and visually concrete relationship with it. But that's sort of my impression always of your paintings. But at some point you were also talking about you from the very beginning you wanted to question what painting was, right?
Yeah, sure.
So that it's not canvas, it's bound by it's not a square or rectangle, and it's bound by very clear boundaries. But perhaps because you don't use the canvas, you use layers of glued posters and detritus, and perhaps it's this kind of paradoxical situation between the great scale and a certain fragility and ephemerality of the materials, and those two things together perhaps produce certain kind of openness, for the lack of better terms.
Yeah, I was clearly aware that I really had to create a way to paint that I was comfortable with. that I just was not comfortable sort of working on a canvas at a certain scale, working with paint. I just felt that I needed to work against something a little bit. I needed to kind of, I don't even know, really the string that I use really is just a stand-in for line. So string becomes actually, for me, the tracing or the string becomes a stand-in for the emotive gesture. I don't know if I ever really believe the emotive sort of gesture of, I've never believed it. You know, you activate a cam. I don't know if I ever believed it.
Right.
So I always thought that if I could cool it down or even flatten it out a little bit, that there could be something that I could get to it another way.
Right.
And so almost going back and slowing down my own process. I almost draw the whole painting. I usually start from a drawing, and then I go and sort of retrace it with string to create sort of the line, and then I kind of cover it up and retrieve it, and it's back and forth. But I know that I'm never going I'm never going to capture the first impulse. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, but so do you...
It's like that first hit on a crack pipe. You're never going to get it again. Listen, if you ever hear an addict talk, they will always talk about the first high, and they're always trying to go back and get that first high. I mean, that's just, you know, I'm just sharing. I wasn't an addict, I did hit a crack pipe, but I'm just saying.
Whereas when you would say crack is whack, right?
It's always chasing that first original gesture,
right?
That first initial impulse, the sort of that sort of intuitive gesture. That's what it is. It's actually that sort of intuitive gesture, that kind of when I'm drawing, that sort of intuitive gesture,
right?
That sort of based on my imagination and intuition and using line and intuition and thinking in that very kind of immediate way.
Right.
And then going back on top of that and laying like a sort of a logic on top of it, a very methodical logic with the string mapping sort of the intuition in a very logical way. And then on top of that, pushing it back even further with the material. And then somehow going back and retrieving, maybe desiring to get back to that first gesture, but knowing that that you'll never get back to it.
But you have to constantly make the effort.
You have to make the effort, so this back and forth and uncovering parts of it, and then some parts are completely gone. So I think that it really is this kind of back and forth between, a better word, right brain, left brain, I don't know, something like that. And so these sort of, I think it's almost a way of it's a way of mapping my own neurosis, maybe.
When do you know it's finished?
Oh, you know, you just know. You every artist. I mean, you better know.
Right.
You just know. You know.
In the Art21 interview, you also talked a little bit about going to Cal Arts and discovering writings, certain kind of writings, which you called postmodern. Are you postmodern? Are you totally pomo?
Oh, a pomo.
Yeah.
Pomo. No. Yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, I didn't really know what it was. I mean, I'm. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I never.
I mean, what about
post something? I don't know.
What about it so resonated with you? That the kind of readings that you were doing?
Well, that they were dismantling a very sort of traditional way of looking at the world. I really came from a traditional system. I came from mainstream, and I sort of understood that the value system that I came from was basically based on a Protestant tradition. I came from sort of a community that went to church, and I went to church, sort of, kind of, in a way. And even the idea of sin was based on a Protestant tradition, or if being bad and good. I understood these sort of highs and lows, bad and good. And so I was never, even though my mother was very progressive, she was within that system, and she was, you know, bad girl. You know? We didn't go to church, so we were bad people, you know, and the good people. So it was still from within that system. That was just a system we grew up in.
Right.
So when I went to school, and I started reading this sort of in and out around dismantling, viewing it from different positions, not accepting sort of this power as being the univocal voice of sort of everythingness. That was really exciting to me because I thought, oh, wait a minute, there's a little more fissures here. There's a little bit more ways to negotiate around and in, and so that was really exciting to me. So I got away from these real strong binaries. I got, I didn't have to be thought. I stopped thinking of myself within a very narrow body of ideas.
Right.
You know, so it kind of opened it up a little bit.
Right. So you're mostly known as a painter, although that term is a very difficult one here. But obviously, as you have shown in the documentary as well as presentation, that you work in different media as well. You work in video sometimes, and it made me wonder, are there certain kind of situations and impulses that make you want to go out of your main medium to go into the video? And when I was watching practice, you said something about there are always roadblocks. You wanted to set up the situation to metaphorize the fact that there are always roadblocks. So I kind of understood. I assumed that so video was the right medium in this case because you were trying to present a situation, a hypothetical situation. But that's not always the case, is it? I mean, you have another video, for instance, that's titled Niagara, which just simply shows the back of this walking man, somebody from your neighborhood. So can you talk a little bit about how you decide to work in certain kind of medium depending on what sort of situations or desires?
I think that, when I'm painting, my studio's in South Central, and South Central is probably one of the most written about, formalized places in the world. I mean, I can be in Tokyo and say, I'm from South Central? Everybody has an idea of what South Central is. It is the most figurative, non-abstract place I've ever been. So I think in my painting practice, I went to the most figurative environment, and I wanted to abstract it. I was just interested in that. That was something. Is it possible to take something that's so written about and narrow and abstract it? Find these little fissures or these little interests, but it's a very hermetic practice. This abstracting, it's very hermetic. It's in the studio a lot. But then there's often times where there's another project where I simply want to have much more of a social conversation, much more immediate conversation. And I feel that for New Orleans, I knew that, I don't even know if he asked me to do paintings, but I knew I certainly wasn't going to put up paintings in New Orleans. I knew that I was going to do a large-scale sculpture. And then there's some times where video works better for something because it lends itself to the idea. Painting, I just do almost every day. It's like it's hermetic in a way. Well, it's not even hermetic. It's just I'm doing it in the studio. I'm not doing it outside. Right. It's not really hermetic. People are always stopping by and knocking on the door.
Should we open it? Should we open it up to some questions? Okay.
Well, that's better. They should keep the lights up. They do that live.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in knowing about is how you made the transition from just making the art to actually selling it and being in museums, and how did that happen?
How do you make the transition from making the art to, that's not a transition. It's, all that stuff is completely out of your control. What you have control over is what you can do in your studio. I know that sounds like, I don't want to hear that. And I didn't really believe that for years, but it actually is true. Because what will happen is, if you find your point of view and you do your thing, curators will get it. And good work does have a way of finding places for it to be shown. People will get it, and they will sort of get behind it. The thing that you just have to do is your work. And what has happened over the last years, especially sort of over the last 10 years, is it's been the rise of the commercial scene so much. It's sort of right out of grad school, right into the commercial scene, and so on and so forth. And that happened about in 1999, 2000. Actually, with the rise of my career, I got out in 1998. By 1999, I heard through the grapevine that Yale, Columbia, it was Yale, Columbia, and UCLA had allowed gallerists into the studios, and the gallerists had given MFA studios, given them shows, and the shows had sold. The work had sold. So therefore, what happened was it changed the trajectory of what we do. There was a silent coup that no one critiqued it. We just went, oh, okay, that's fine, this is business as usual. Well, for me, when I got out of school, I was under another rubric. It was under, well, you start with nonprofits, and you start in smaller spaces, you collab. That whole model was just off the table. So by the time 2000, I did have a group show at the Studio Museum of Harlem. The only people that presented themselves to me were galleries, because this was a new system. It was the rise of the art fair, it was the rise of the private collector, it was the rise of this whole kind of thing. I think that it was irresponsible on the side of universities. I think it was, I never thought that it was healthy, because young artists were all so insecure that we need a buffer between the gallery scene and us in the beginning, because you are so willing to say yes, 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 because there's nothing else there's no other game in town. I had to learn on the job. I had to learn while I was being taken advantage of, because you just didn't understand. I didn't understand what it was. And I was, oh, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, sure. I'll pay the production. What is production? I didn't know what production was in the beginning. I didn't know what it was. Okay, production money. Oh, wow, okay. But you've already signed up for the gallery system. So I think that even though that system, by the way, is gone, so that's not happening anymore. So what's happening is you've been sort of trained to believe in a certain system. Well, that system's not there anymore. But what are young people supposed to do now, because that's the system that we've been so irresponsibly feeding to you? And that's why you asked me those questions. Well, that system was not critiqued, and now it's gone. So what I would say is, that this is a great time to be an artist, and this is a great time to be, because you have the possibility of, because nobody's looking, you have the possibility of doing whatever you want to do. And that can be exciting. But on the other side, you say, yeah, but wait a minute, I want. So it's just, it can be but I think it's going to fall back on the responsibility of the individual to make it happen, however you see it happening. That's just my big old 2 cents on that question. Sorry. Did I depress you? She's like, yeah, no. but it's a larger question that's been really bothering me, because I really feel like it's something that should have been critiqued and it should have been questioned. And I don't think that, like, for instance, UCLA has a gallery called Black Dragon. Well, I don't think that a university should have a commercial gallery. No, I don't think that. We shouldn't go straight from grad school right into product, because the galleries, they sell product. That's what they do. They sell product. Before it's a product, it's art. It's what we do. So going to nonprofits and working in smaller spaces or starting your own spaces, that's a way of getting your own feet grounded before you present yourself to consumer world. Like, I'm not going to ask Abby the questions. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Oh, there we go.
I know, right?
So you talked a lot about the sort of way that LA is really segmented, and there's this economic divide. I also went to CalArts, and I found that that area is this really perfect little example of that, in that you have CalArts, and then you have Valencia, and then you have Newhall.
Right.
And so I guess I was just wondering, what were some of the experiences that you had while you were living in that area that influenced you?
I didn't really like it. I could not believe, Valencia, I started doing a little research, and Valencia, other than San Diego, has the longest history of sort of tract home living. They're one of the oldest sort of tract home. It was really difficult to, you get Stetson Ranch, and it really is, it's like tract home utopia. There's these, they just go on and on and on. And then it's sort of where the track homes stop, then there's a theme park, Magic Mountain. It's probably Six Flags here. So it's kind of funny. It's a strange place. I struggled with that. I mean, I never was comfortable there. I never was comfortable there. From the day I got there to the day I left. But maybe in that kind of uncomfortableness, something happened. But I never was comfortable. I was comfortable maybe with my peer group and sort of things, but I was never comfortable in the environment.
Any other question? Down here?
Hello. You mentioned in Prospect.1, it was your goal, you knew you wanted to have a sustainable relationship with people in the community, but you also wanted to approach these political areas through a side door. And with New Orleans being such a place with a rich culture and a very touchy, strong history, do you feel like artists approach that biennial from a spectacle point of view, or they knew that they wanted to involve the community? How do you feel as a participant in that biennial that the venue was different from other biennials?
Oh, the venue was no different than the other biennial. I mean, the fact that they put it in New Orleans, okay, they had some political implications, but if you go to Dakar, if you go to Sao Paulo, it's vapor. I mean, biennials take over. They sort of colonize places for a certain amount of time. But that being the case, there's still possibilities. I think it's a one-to-one. It's really the artist's intent. If an artist wants to fly down, put up their work and fly out, that's fine. I mean, it really has to do with each artist's desire. And I don't have this sort of macro thing of what artists should do. I chose to sort of do this particular project this way, but at the same time in Sao Paulo, I just made something in my studio, I stacked it up and I sent it down, I put it on the wall. So it just depends on, I had an interest, a particular interest as a subject, as my subject. I really stress that I think it's really important to sort of take a subject position to things, because once you step out of that, then it becomes really complicated. It's like being, being black and sort of like, isn't it, I went to a conversation about a Barack Obama, and everybody said, well, isn't it great? And I said, no, I voted for McCain. And I kept saying it, I kept like saying it and saying it, till the people really got angry. Like, well, how could you? I said, no, McCain, and I was really to push a point that this idea of the sort of, essentialism, race essentialism, is like, it's just dangerous. It's just really dangerous. So I always say, well, my subject position, my subjectivity, what I decided to do, I didn't vote for McCain, but it was just to make a point. So for me, that project was that, I decided to take that on. I take it from project to project.
Can you hear me? Oh, there. I apologize in advance if this goes on a little bit, but one of the questions I wanted to ask you about, from the beginning of your talk, you mentioned the word palimpsest. When you're talking about the city and you're talking about these images. And some of the images that you were showing, specifically the fences and these signs that went along with it, to me brings up these sort of like I said, the layering of images. But it also becomes for me an analogy for memory as well.
Yeah.
For a way to sort of think about the way that a city in this case has its own memory.
Sure.
The way that streets are laid down, they're torn down. And you talked about specific things that happen within Los Angeles. You said we seem to burn it down every 20 years or so. And I wanted to ask you, to what degree your work deals with memory, either the cartographic or the urban memory, and perhaps your own, specifically with a place like New Orleans. With the ARC project, it seems to be this container of things,
Sure.
Placed
Yeah.
at a specific place at a specific time. But with Los Angeles, and I guess I'll just leave it at that. Do you see your work, in a certain sense, having this sort of interest in memory? And to what degree does it also have maybe a relationship with memorials in general, about place markers that speak to a specific event or about a certain place?
Oh God, my work has everything to do with memory. But it's the thing I love is, oh God, it's all memory. It's all layers of memory. It's all baggage. People. But the thing about memory is it's always imperfect. So memory can be pushed into imagination with me very quickly. I don't know where the memory stops and the imagination begins, and quite frankly, I don't care. I just collapse them all together. It's like when you're mad at somebody and you try to recount the story, and then you kind of like massage the story to kind of make it go your way a little bit better, so your friend can be on your side and not the other person's side. So this kind of idea of things that collapse, that memory and that specifics and that collapse, because after the initial moment, everything starts to get pushed into memory and to imagination, and it gets pushed further and further. So I enjoy that collapsing. I don't think that the ARC, I never looked at it as a memorial because it was so part of an imagination, my own imagination, and I pushed it into myth. I pushed it farther back than the Bible because I knew that if I stopped it at the Bible and call it Noah's Ark, I knew it was going to have every black church in New Orleans, wanting to have church services. They already did have a couple of church, which is fine. It's all fine. I like when everything mixes together. But I pushed it back into kind of Greek mythology, which pushes it even further into kind of myth, and myth pushes it even further into sort of, and I don't know where one stops and the other begins. It's just, but at the end of the day, it's just all Mark's head. It's just all, I got a lot going on. And I leave it at that at the end.
Any other?
I think what a lot of what you've talked about has to do with a philosophical fluidity,
Yeah.
and a kind of artistic sovereignty. So you could, like Dan Cameron being an independent contractor from, the board of trustees.
Yeah. Sure.
And that's based, or Damien Hirst
Yeah.
on the market,
Mm-hmm.
and that's very indicative of what's happening with the youngest artists coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Is they're rejecting the kind of dogma that happened in the last 100 years,
Yeah.
which is putting a lot of art critics and a lot of art professionals out of business.
Really?
I think.
Yeah,
I think that's what'll ultimately.
Yeah.
The strong will survive.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But hasn't that always been the case? I'm trying to think like when it. I got a lot more questions than answers right now. It's the landscape of what we do has shifted, and I don't think any of us it's just too early to know. It's just in flux right now. We're just in a flux moment, and which is interesting, but at the same time, it's everyone's always asking. So but it's funny though because the questions people ask me usually have to do with the gallery system. You know, how did Art Basel do? Or are the galleries still open? You know, how are you doing? You know? And people are, so Mark, how are you doing? I'm thinking, well, I'm all right. I mean, you know, I'm trying to figure out. Oh, you're talking about like the selling of a work. Right. So it's
something. But those are the signposts for which camp was right.
Yeah, but you know, at another level, it's kind of also not the bummer, but it was really interesting. The flip side of the sort of economicness that we had for the last few years, it also allowed people that were so sort of marginalized, a lot of people of color, women, suddenly were having more access to sort of money. And they were doing some really, beginning to do, we'll never know what those type of access to a little bit more would have done, because it's like the first hired and the last hired and the first fired. You know, it's always sort of like, so you kind of go, oh, you know, you just kind of, so I look at everything from both sides. I just have a lot of questions. I just got a lot of questions.
I think I find that the most compelling thing about the work is that you refused. It's not just about material exploration, but it's really about a philosophical exploration and not positioning yourself in a quasi-religion of postmodernism or modernism. The definitions are not what's important to you. It's about the questions inside the world and the work, which is, you know, is it art for art or art for life? Is just like, oh, well, okay, yeah, well, they wrote a lot about that, but I'm right here working in the studio or not in the studio. But the last thing I wanted to just say is what's next. So what are you working on?
Oh, what's next? Yeah, what's next? Well, I'm working on a survey show, which is kind of interesting. They're kind of looking at my work over the last 10 years. And you know, it's funny though, because people always, oh, you know, don't do a survey show. You're going to hate doing a survey show. And I thought, oh, I'm going to hate doing it. It doesn't bother me at all. I mean, I don't feel like I'm going to die after the survey show. I don't feel like, you know, you know, it's funny though. I never know how I'm going to feel about anything until I get into it. But it's sort of, they look at, I'm going to do some new work. It's going to travel to some museums, and I am waiting for the reflective moment. I really am not reflective at all. What's that about? I know that it's my work, and I understand that they have a chronology, and that and that's completely fine. Right. But I don't have this nostalgic reflection.
I think most artists don't do.
Yeah,
they don't look back. I mean, they just have to constantly move.
I'm good. And so
job to reflect.
Yeah, the curator's job. So I'll do that, and I'll do a couple other, you know, shows. But to be quite frank, you know, the professional side of it gets be a bit much sometimes. Just traveling around and stuff. I think I'm just gonna go to the studio and probably work and see what comes up. Besides that, I'm making a book, film. Got a little film idea. Oh, I'm always making stuff. I've been making stuff since I was 2.
Should we take one final question, perhaps? Ooh. Okay, here's one.
Okay, right. Okay, you, and then the way up there. That's with the pink shirt on. So you can start.
I was just wondering if you think you'll always be in Los Angeles, or if you would ever relocate.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I would. I mean, yeah, I'm open. Not to Minneapolis. Not to Minneapolis. It's too cold. You got a question back there? Yeah.
Hi, I met you when you signed my book, and I appreciated that.
Oh, yeah, okay, yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I was wondering, I remember I told you I also lived in LA, and I was, matter of fact, I work kind of close to where you live, or the studio is. I work in Inglewood. But I was wondering, you mentioned that you felt that people in LA were in areas because of economics. which, I think it is an economical situation, and I agree with you. I was wondering, now that you've made it, so to speak, as an artist.
I have.
Yeah.
No, I have.
Where,
right. Right.
financially,
No, that's right. You're right.
You're financially gelled.
Right.
all
My friends tell me that.
And so I'm wondering, did you stay in where you were raised, or did you,
Right.
move out and keep your studio,
Right.
at home base because it felt more comfortable, or the rent was cheaper?
Right. One of those
as
keep
an
it
artist,
real.
that
Keep it real.
That counts too.
Well, you know
curious
what?
about that.
It's funny though, because here's the split. I actually grew up in Santa Monica, which nobody ever writes about. They always say that I grew up in South Central. Wow, I didn't grow up in South Central. Really, I grew up in Santa Monica. I grew up in South Central until I was 10 years old. Then I moved to Santa Monica. Santa Monica is a beach community about 30 minutes from Los Angeles, and it is clearly a middle, upper class, pretty white. When I grew up, he's nodding his head. He's like, "Oh, I know where Santa Monica is." So I didn't really grow up in really. I mean, I went to all white schools. I was the only black guy in the schools, and but my mother always had a business in South Central, and so I always went. I went to school, and I would sometimes go when I could drive, and I would go visit her, or I'd go hang out in the hair salon or something like that. So I did have this kind of going between these two sites. I didn't look at them as two sites. It was just going from my mom's business to where I lived. And racially, they were different, but somehow it all worked for me. So then I went to Cal Arts, which is another place. So when I came back, I actually did move to Inglewood, and because it was cheap, and I had a friend who had the studio. But it is really funny because I started my career at the same time being out of grad school, and so they grabbed really quickly that my studio was in Inglewood, South Central, and then here we go, and it really became kind of this thing. And I had to, at some point, just kind of again, it's talking about sort of claiming your own subjectivity, well, my narrative is that and any artist would have gotten the studio. It's not a race thing. So when I did, the consciousness when I bought my own studio, I actually ended up buying the hair salon that my mother always had. And I turned that into my studio, because that part of the city is this kind of a culturally sort of black area, and I wanted my practice, whatever my hybridness of, one of my assistants is Korean, another one's Latino, my hybridness of who I am, I wanted it to be injected into that place. So I suppose that I did come back to where my mother and where the business, and so everyone knew me in the neighborhood as the son of, oh, you're the son of the hairdresser. How's your mom? But when they saw me as an artist and started to read about me and knocking on the door, is this you in the paper? So what I liked about that was you started to have these conversations. You had this sort of bleeding through, and these. So it's not necessarily that did I keep it kind of, did I forget where I was from, or do I keep it real? I kept it real to me, to my experiences, but I don't know what it means. I actually don't live in Santa Monica. I live in another neighborhood, but I didn't. I never thought that I had a responsibility, or I never had the desire to make a conscious choice to do that. It just some parts of it just happened naturally, that I ended up getting this building and remodeling it and kind of having my studio there. And I do like to have the studio open when they have kind of festivals and people walk in, and I'm playing the basketball video, and I love the interactions. But that was just kind of a personal thing. But I didn't even grow up in Inglewood, and I had to use a map like anybody else when I first. I was like, well, where am I? How do I go here? How do I do that? So it's kind of funny because, and I think that they identify me much more with South Central because of a race. Really, quite frankly, they put an essentialist or they put a realness on me because of race. I can tell you anything, anywhere in Santa Monica because of where I grew up, and I can tell you a very specific place in South Central because of my mother's hair salon. So. And it's funny though, because when I first started, this idea, I read about this, South Central hairdresser, and then he was an artist. And it was unbelievable. This is like if you guys Google me, that's probably the first thing you'll get. It's like, wow, I'm still a hairdresser. But it sort of create this sort of essentialism and race and gender is really strong, and it's easy. And every artist and everybody has to struggle. It's not particularly me. She has gray hair. I can't assume that a woman who has gray hair, what that means. Everybody struggles with some type of preconceived notion of who they are, identity. So, and I had to kind of dig myself out of that. I had to kind of negotiate that, navigate that, but at the same time, keeping it kind of like honest as to what I wanted things to be. So. I hope that answered the question. Okay. Well, you guys have been great. Thank you.